Okay, let's get started. Style is the title of a book. Lessons one and two here. This pretty much just translates to chapters one and two in the book. And I just want to review some of the basic concepts because it's a book that is about writing and how to write and what makes good writing. And so I have found its concepts to be particularly helpful with students, for students when they are trying to figure out what even makes good writing and how do we typically tell. It's generally pretty ambiguous until we see some examples and really flesh it out. So we're just going to get started here. The book overall starts off with two beliefs in the first chapter. Now, the two beliefs are that it is good to write clearly. And this is just based on the idea that writing is for communication. That is its goal, that is its purpose, and which is generally how it is for language. But in order for writing to be considered good, it must be clear. Clear writing is going to be good writing. Because if you're just not clear, it impedes on the communication. That's how you lead to misunderstandings, miscommunications, and so then therefore there is something then inherently not good about the writing. That's the idea there. And so from there, not only is it good to write clearly, but anyone can do it. And the book firmly believes that. I also firmly believe that anyone could do it, anyone can write clearly. Okay, now clearly obviously means that the complexity of the sentences are not going to be the priority, even in academic papers. Clearly here means that simple sentences will always be better than complex ones if it means the reader can understand you better. Okay, this is very important. Being able to understand what you're writing is so much more important than how flowery your language is, how complex your sentence seems to flow, how long they can be, how many ideas you can fit in one sentence. None of that matters if your writing is not clear. Okay, so that's first and foremost what we want to focus on. I actually highly recommend students to not write complex sentences if it means I will not be able to understand you. And that's going to be fundamental when it comes time to grading papers because if I don't have a clear idea of what you're trying to say, what you're trying to argue for, your logic behind your argument, I cannot give you the grade that I want to give you. Okay, that's the idea that we must be able to write clearly. I need to be able to understand you. And so that's that there. Okay, so why do we create unclear writing? The book proposes four main things. Sometimes it's to hide that we are confused too. We just simply just, well, oh, I don't know. Haven't been paying attention in class and maybe we're a little behind, but then, now we have a paper due, so we got to throw something together. And I'm just going to throw in a bunch of words and phrases I've been hearing my teacher say for the last 3 weeks, and then it'll work. It does not work. Sometimes we don't consider the reader. I try nipping that in the bud with the introductory lecture that we had a few weeks ago on telling us to consider the audience, think what they need to know, what they should already know, and then use that to kind of decide what belongs in an intro, what probably needs to be explained, what doesn't need to explain, and that also helps with the clarity. Okay, but not considering the reader, not really knowing your audience will absolutely lead to unclear writing. Okay, sometimes we create unclear writing because we're simply new to the conversation. We're not familiar with the vocabulary, right? We're writing about rhetoric, perhaps, ethos, pathos, logos. Maybe it's the first time we've really heard of these words. And so now we have to use pathos in a sentence. Okay, how would I conjugate that? Like, how would it be as an adjective? What would it look like if it was suddenly a verb? How would I change that? Right? Sometimes it would be um, something like that. And then sometimes it's to impress with the complexity because there's this notion that the more complex the sentence looks, the more crazy and long and complicated it is, the more intelligent you seem. right? There's a notion. I'm not saying you possibly agree with that, but there is this notion out there. And that's just frankly not true, especially with someone who has read a lot, or someone who is also a writer, or any teacher who is well versed in the language. If we see a long, complicated sentence, but then it's filled with grammar errors, we're not impressed at all. There is nothing to be impressed of, because we see all the errors, and fundamentally what ends up happening is we just see that you don't know how to write a sentence of that length, of that complexity. And that's just made evident by the fact that it exists in your paper and we are reading it there unedited. And so that is not actually that impressive at all. So please, this is me repeating myself now, but I just want to reiterate, do not write things you're not comfortable writing with. It is okay to keep sentences simple. I need you to just show me what you know. Okay? I don't need to see everything you don't know. When I grade your essay on everything that's on the paper. What you want to do is you want to show me what you do know so that I can grade you on everything that is clear, everything that is pretty much your best. And so if you're not able to write complex sentences yet, that's fine. We'll eventually get there, and then we'll talk about it more. And it's something that just naturally, honestly, it just naturally flows the more that you read. The rhythm and the flow and the style of complex sentences will just come naturally the more that we read and the more that we see others doing it and practicing it the right way. And so for now, if you cannot, it's absolutely fine. I would just avoid it. Okay? Whatever your reasoning is, whatever the problem might be for you, for why you might create unclear writing, if any of these vibe with you, that's great. Knowing the problem is half the solution. Identify it and then just stop doing it. If you're confused, then just ask me questions or ask another professor questions, another maybe tutor perhaps, ask them questions. If we don't consider reader, hey, start considering the reader, right? If we're new to a conversation, we don't really know the vocabulary, that's great. We got two options. We either look it up, see example sentences of how it's used, and then we try to implement that in our sentences, or change the word. Don't use it, right? Again, you do not want to use words you don't know, because if you use them incorrectly, it's just going to be very awkward. I then know it's just so obvious to me that you don't actually know that word and what it means. And I don't need to know that. If you simply just don't use the word, then I won't know you don't know that word, right? And so that's the idea there, okay? All right, so when we're writing and reading, this is chapter 1. They just pretty much touch upon the same thing that King mentioned in Reading to Write. It's just as profitable to read bad writing than it is to read good writing, because you can learn from other people's mistakes. You can pay attention to when things are confusing or unclear while you're reading, and then you just don't do the same thing while you're writing. And then the chapter 1 or lesson 1, it ends with rewriting, and this is then also tying back and agreeing with Anne Lamott from Shitty First Drafts. You want to draft first, and then you want to edit after. Page 5 of Style says perfection is ideal, but it is ultimately the death of done. If you sit there trying to write the perfect sentence, and you will not move on until that one sentence is perfected, that essay is going to take forever. It's going to eat up your life. I do not recommend it. There is no writer that recommends it. We see here already 2 authors that are recommending you against that. Okay. Lesson 2 goes over subject and action. Those are the 2 fundamental items that are required in every complete sentence. You need subject, verb, which is an action. Okay, every sentence rests on those things. So what happens then? Well, the focus of your point should be the main subject, and important actions need to be written grammatically as verbs. And I know you're thinking, professor, duh. If it's the subject, isn't it the focus? Aren't verbs just action words? Like, isn't this a little elementary? Let me show you what I mean. So we have an example from the book. Once upon a time, as a walk through the woods was taking place on the part of Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf's jump out from behind a tree occurred, causing her fright. Now let's compare this to 2b. Once upon a time, Little Red Riding Hood was walking through the woods when the wolf jumped out from behind a tree and frightened her. I hope we can agree that the second sentence is much clearer. And if you look at the two sentences, they're very similar. It's the same idea, it's the same story, it's even the same part of the same story. Most of the words are the same, but one sentence is significantly clearer than the other, and it has to do with those 2 points. If you look at 2a, you see that we have a verb, we have an action that has been forced to be becoming the subject. I have subjects in both sentences highlighted in yellow and actions highlighted in green. So you see here the wolf's jump is actually the subject of that sentence. Everything else before that, once upon a time, as a walk through the woods was taking place on the part of Little Red Riding Hood, that describes the wolf's jump. The wolf's jump is the subject of the sentence, and what did the wolf's jump do? It occurred. That is what happens when we do not. That is what happens when we don't put words where they are best fit. And it forces them to take on another role in the sentence because of grammar rules, where we have this crazy thing in English where we can change the function of the word depending on where it's placed in the sentence. A quick example is if I tell you to Google something, you will then go on Google, a noun, and then go Google, the verb, what I told you to look up. Right? And so that is how English works, and that is how our grammar and our sentence structure works. And so we want to be careful with that. If we look at 2b, we see here Little Red Riding Hood as the subject of the sentence, which makes more sense because she is the focus of the story. And what was she doing? She was walking. Okay. One thing that I do want to note is that sometimes you do want to take a look at what tense your paper is in. If you're jumping back and forth, it's probably one of 2 things. It's either one, you are writing sentences that are not putting words in their proper places, and then we get this kind of lack of clarity going on, like in 2a, and then it forces verbs to become descriptors or other parts of the sentence that then change the tense of the verb. And that would make it grammatically correct, but we want to try to avoid that as much as possible. If you just look at 2b, the one that we decided was much clearer, it's all pretty much the same tense, the same general tense. It's all past tense. So that's one reason. Second reason would be that you are actually just consistently switching back and forth as you are writing. And if that is what you are doing, we need to stop doing that. We need to axe that from academic writing. It does not belong there. We cannot switch tenses constantly. For the most part, all of your tenses need to be present tense. The author states later on in the story, she illustrates this idea, she argues, he illustrates, right? He then explains to us. Those are the kinds of, that's what we want to do, okay? All right, one last thing on chronology. And I'm going to just let you, I'm not going to read all this because I'm sure you can read it on your own. But what I want to point out is that as you're reading these 3, it should be pretty evident to you that the first sentence is still the clearest. And the reason why it is the clearest is because of the ordering of the information. It goes from a general once upon a time to a moment within Once Upon a Time where Little Red Riding Hood is walking through the woods. And then within that trajectory from A to B, a wolf jumped out and frightened her. And the reason why the others don't make as much sense or feel even nonsensical when you read it is because the chronology is not in order. And so this is an example for you to just see and study and consider that the ordering of information in a sentence will absolutely matter. And we're going to get more into that as well when we go into style lessons 3 and 4 and how sentences need to fit well next to each other in a paragraph. Okay?